German federal prosecutors have taken over the investigation into a sabotage attack on Berlin's power infrastructure that left about 45,000 homes and 2,200 businesses without electricity for up to 4 days during freezing weather. The blackout was caused by arson targeting a key transmission bottleneck, prompting deployment of emergency services, army field kitchens, and civil defense units. Authorities are considering terrorism charges alongside arson and disruption of public services. A left-wing extremist group calling itself the Volcano Group claimed responsibility. Officials and experts say the attack exposed vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure and renewed debate over left-wing extremism and preparedness for coordinated sabotage. Britain confirmed it provided enabling support to the United States during the seizure of the Russian-flagged oil tanker Marinara, formerly Bella 1, in international waters northwest of Scotland. The Pentagon said the vessel was involved in violations of U.S. sanctions linked to illicit Venezuelan oil. London said its forces assisted at Washington's request as part of global efforts to counter sanctions evasion, alleging the tanker had a nefarious history tied to Russian-Iranian networks. Moscow accused the U.S. of violating international maritime law. The U.S. also seized a second tanker, Sophia, in the Caribbean. France and Germany are coordinating with European partners in Denmark on a response to overtures from the Trump administration about acquiring Greenland. U.S. officials have described Greenland as a national security priority and said military options remain on the table, prompting strong European opposition. Paris said it would act jointly with Berlin and Warsaw, while Germany confirmed close coordination with Denmark. U.S. officials have downplayed the likelihood of force, saying tough rhetoric aims to spur negotiations. Denmark and Greenland are seeking talks with Washington amid warnings that force would threaten NATO unity. The British government has barred U.S.-based Islamic cleric Dr. Shadi Al-Msari from entering the UK, cancelling planned speaking events in Birmingham, Bolton, and Ilford. Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood imposed the ban after Al-Msari publicly defended Hamas following the October 7th attacks on Israel, in which more than 1,000 people were killed and hundreds taken hostage. The Home Office said there is no place in Britain for foreign nationals who spread hate or extremist ideas. Al-Msari denied being an extremist, saying his message promotes compassion. Britain has previously banned other Islamic preachers over terror-related remarks. Democrats are highlighting the shooting death of a progressive protester to reinforce a 2026 campaign message that President Trump's immigration enforcement is creating chaos. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey blamed federal ICE operations for unrest, with Walz pledging to prepare the National Guard to protect residents from what he called rogue federal actions.
To Minnesotans, I say this: I feel your anger. I'm angry. They want a show. We can't give it to them. We cannot. If you protest and express your First Amendment rights, please do so peacefully, as you always do. We can't give them what they want.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announced a National Royal Commission into anti-Semitism, following weeks of pressure after an Islamic State-inspired mass shooting at a Hanukkah event at Sydney's Bondi Beach killed 15 people. The inquiry will examine the prevalence and drivers of anti-Semitism, investigate the attack, and recommend measures to counter extremism.
What we've done is listen, and we've worked through those issues. And we've concluded that where we have landed today is an appropriate way forward for national unity. I have emphasised that. This has been a time where I've listened to people genuinely sitting down, talking about their experiences as well.
This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
There is a problem with medicine, and we can explain what it is by looking back to the discovery of penicillin. Penicillin, it turns out, was not just an accidental finding. Alexander Fleming discovered that mold he found in a culture dish was killing bacteria, but it took over 10 years before a team at Oxford University were able to isolate the active ingredient. They produced small quantities for preclinical and clinical trials, helping prove the compound was safe and could beat infection. However, they couldn't produce it at scale. In 1941, Andrew Jackson Moyer of the US Department of Agriculture, the forerunner to the FDA, suggested changes to the manufacturing process, enabling mass production. It turns out medicines are not invented when someone discovers a new molecular entity. They are the product of key stakeholders working together collaboratively. Until medicine can be manufactured at scale, it may as well not exist. And in 2025, this is a problem. In the 1980s, pharmaceutical companies began outsourcing production. Suddenly the system was significantly less integrated. Someone with a new discovery today will find themselves disconnected from the rest of the development and manufacturing process. Companies that develop medicine are still happy to work with big established pharma companies, but the modern day Flemings are cut out of the system. The result is far fewer new medicines coming to market. We want to fix this by ensuring the pharma industry builds a more integrated supply chain. We also believe that doctors' expertise administering medicine should be included at the beginning of the process. We know that doctors on the front line have insights about how to repurpose medicine. Doctors should be able to report their findings so that the necessary testing can be completed and they can share the results worldwide. Learn more here and help us take medicines back to the future.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
And welcome to The World Today and the Protagonists for a Friday. Nice to have your company. Personally, I'm looking forward to a weekend this time. I can't wait for it in Australia, whereas our guests are overseas in Australia. It's summer. And we're going to enjoy the pool tomorrow, a couple of cocktails and a good swim. But first of all, let's look at what's happening in the world. We're seeing an ongoing and tedious pattern of peace talks that lead nowhere or to further escalation of conflict. Positive talks between Putin and Trump are constantly undermined by Zelensky and the coalition of the willing, or should that be the unwilling? The recent attack on Putin's residence was clearly meant to disrupt negotiations and cause Putin to abandon a peaceful path. Predictably, Russia has launched a combined missile and drone attack on Ukraine's, whose air defence systems are simply overwhelmed. To cause further angst, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky have signed a declaration pledging that Britain and France are prepared to deploy troops to Ukraine if a peace deal is reached with Russia. Of course, this was rejected by Russia. What is the US plan? Let's find out from our panel if they expect anything other than ongoing war, something Russia cannot cease and those supporting it simply cannot afford. My guest today, Dmitry Orlov, a linguist and author. Kate Jones is Bureau Chief for World Media, UK, USA. Danny Armstrong, Moscow-based Russia specialist. Thank you for joining us. First of all, Dmitry, what's the feeling within Russia at the moment, or Moscow for that matter, towards a peace deal with Ukraine? One of the stumbling points is that by putting the troops very close to the border, that is exactly what Putin and Russia don't want. Do they have any hope for peace, or will this go right down to the wire, or subtitled, will this go right down to when Russia wins this war?
Well, there's a great deal of optimism in Russia that peace will be achieved through Russian military victory. As far as the Russians are concerned, NATO is very close to being defeated and possibly is on its way to falling apart through Trump's efforts as well as others. As far as peace talks, those have been a sham all along. but they have been very productive in destroying the morale among the Ukrainian troops. The Ukrainian troops used to think that America has their back and that they're going to be victorious in fighting Russia because America is going to join the fray if things don't go well. But now that things have not gone well, the Americans are cutting their losses and opting out. The peace negotiations themselves are ridiculous. The people participating, one of these people was Kellogg, who is corrupt as far as I can tell, and he's out already. And he's been replaced by Trump's golf buddy and his son-in-law. And their counterpart on the Russian side is this American educated businessman who is in charge of a direct investment fund. These are not diplomats. They're not negotiating peace treaties. They're doing their own private business and using the Ukraine as some sort of a cover. As far as European involvement or British involvement in these quote unquote peace negotiations, that's completely ridiculous because nobody's even paying attention to what they have to say. They just kept going to Kiev to collect suitcases of American cash. And now Zelensky can basically blackmail them and get them to give Zelensky even more money, except that they're out of cash and their popularity is gone, and they have no power base to speak of. So they say ridiculous things about deploying troops that they don't even have, and those troops would be targets the moment they arrive. So it's all quite ridiculous, but this fight.
Kate Jones, Bureau Chief for World Media UK USA. It's very hard to read Donald Trump at the moment, isn't it? I mean, who would have thought that he was going to kidnap a leader of a country? Now he's going to bomb parts of Mexico. It's very hard to read. What do you think his philosophy or his stance on Ukraine is at the moment? Some have said that he just wants to pass it on to anybody else but the USA.
Well, actually, I find him quite easy to read, so and pretty consistent too over the years. But I would say, in terms of Ukraine, of course, there's a great deal of fatigue with this continuing. The president repeatedly says it's too much death on both sides, and it's not in the U.S. interest for this to continue. So I'm certain that the desire is for the war to end and for Russia to re-enter the world economy and things to go back to normal. And I'm sure the Europeans as well would like to have fuel running from Russia. They don't have a lot of other options, do they? So I think from a global economic perspective, there's extraordinary fatigue. From a human loss, there's extraordinary fatigue. And this little maneuver in Venezuela is highly significant because it does garner the oil market, and that puts pressure on the barrel price for Russia. If, as the president says, they can bring the barrel price down to $50 a barrel, it's very hard to continue your war chest. So that's an additional pressure, but it's also obviously directed at China. And it's directed at the Western Hemisphere and calming that space, which for a long time, at least among Republicans, was considered a great travesty to see so much Chinese and Russian influence, and also just the drug disruption and general all kinds of disruption. So it was kind of one full sweep to grab Maduro, stick it to China, tell Russia knock it off, and also deal with Western Hemisphere issues.
Yeah, very interesting. We'll continue this part in a second. I just want to find out from Danny Armstrong his thoughts on the eventuality, if there's going to be one, of a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. And we don't forget we have Macron, we have Starmer, wanting to, and the EU right behind them. Off you go on, be a peacekeeping force. First of all, we need to have peace before that happens, and secondly, one of Putin's staunchest, or one of his points of contention is that NATO must not be part of that because it's far too close to the Russian border. Danny, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree. But I think you make a sort of a cardinal mistake in the fact that you say that it's a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. I mean, before even this was the SVO, the Special Military Operation, as it's called here, or the invasion or the war, whatever you want to call it, in any other part of the world. This was the Ukraine crisis, and the letters that were being sent back and forth between the two major cities that were trying to thrash out any kind of peace deal then was Washington and Moscow. So if Washington and Moscow are going to sit down and again try and thrash out some sort of a peace deal, then of course all of these other meetings and these other characters and these other players or bit part players in the negotiations so far will be completely obsolete, will be completely superficial. In terms of the NATO expansion, of course, that was one of the main red lines. Of course, red lines that were reiterated again and again and again before this crisis escalated into what we have now. Now, some of those red lines have been added to. That list has got greater and greater, and not all of them have been observed, which is why we see now, if we have UK, theoretically speaking, or French, or any other troops on the ground, it makes a great headline to say they will be targets and it will lead to this and that and the other. But we've seen that before. We've seen that with Russia annexing certain parts of Ukraine. And then if any fighting takes place on those bits of land, it is considered Russian land. It's considered a declaration of war, therefore, rather, against Russia. And of course, nothing ever happened from that. So there's lots of posturing, there's lots of peacocking especially from Europe. And I want to come back to the fact that these bit part players, France and the UK and Germany, these are all headed by people who are facing the lowest popularity and approval ratings that they've ever had. These people are breaking records, as well as Zelensky, in their approval ratings. Zelensky, if many people have called him the Churchill of our time. Now, Churchill never suffered less than a 78% approval rating. Zelensky last year went down to 60% amongst his own people. Merz is somewhere around 30 or below 30. Keir Starmer around about 15%. And of course, Macron has had a myriad domestic problems that he seems to not want to pay attention to. So we've seen this before, this sort of smash and grab, good PR running off to Central Europe or wherever the talks may be for these leaders to kind of turn heads away from what's happening at home. Boris Johnson did it quite often whenever it got too hot to handle back in the UK, whenever there was any scandal about COVID or whenever there was something that he didn't particularly want to confront. The same goes with scuttling off to Davos every time something came up that he didn't particularly want to get his hands dirty with. So if there's any eventuality of peace, first of all, there needs to be meaningful talks between Washington and Moscow. Everybody else can do what they like. I'm not sure that Washington really want to know what's going on in those peace talks. I'm not sure that there were any concrete peace agreements drawn up. As far as the Russian side is concerned, there hasn't been any response from that side. I doubt there will be. But as I say, I'm not sure that there will be anything concrete or anything really material coming from any peace talks, because as we've seen before from Alaska and from in Turkey, these talks tend to not lead anywhere. But it needs to take place between Washington and Moscow. That's the main thing.
Dmitry, I've just got to ask you and find out your thoughts on because I was looking at Paul Singer is in the mix for being one of the vultures to fix up Venezuela, and we have BlackRock, a magnificent organisation, they're in the mix to fix up and pour back enormous wealth and make Ukraine a very wealthy country. I got two questions here. Ukraine, to make Ukraine a BlackRock protege, child of BlackRock and all good things of the West, I would probably think that's probably wishful thinking. Ukraine has always been probably one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Secondly, the thought process from Macron and Keir Starmer and the EU, would you place any credibility or any confidence in that thought process?
I wouldn't. I think that this is all people who are mainly concerned with money and not anything physical, finance people, dreaming their finance dreams that are completely divorced from any physical reality. You have to understand what the Ukraine is at this point. It is a country that's down to perhaps as little as 20, maybe 18 million people from a height of over 35. And half of those people are pensioners. And a great number of the people who aren't pensioners are somehow damaged from the war that's been going on. There's 500,000 people who basically ran away, who are deserters. There are 2 million people who died or were wounded. I'm not sure how those numbers are. Those numbers are way beyond what the Russians have suffered, order of magnitude more. The Ukraine is no longer going to have electricity or running water or functional bridges or roads or any of the other infrastructure. You have to keep in mind that all of Ukrainian infrastructure was inherited from the Soviet Union, and during the recent conflict, it has been, as the Russians like to say, decommunized. It's been destroyed. So basically, the Ukraine will revert to what it has been for historical periods of time, which is what the Russians call the wild field. There won't be any people living there. So what BlackRock thinks they will make of that place, especially considering that it'll be under Russian military control, is just a dream.
And a pretty bad dream too. Kate, what's required to make to have a peace deal? Would you perhaps leave out Starmer and Macron and go back to the start again and work out something that's appealing to both sides? Well, appealing to Moscow because Russia is not losing this battle by any stretch of the imagination, and if it keeps going the way it is, they'll win anyway. So what's required in your mind? Do we still include Starmer and Macron, or do we go to the grown-ups and do it a little differently?
Well, I think the president was extremely clear and said there were three people that needed to do this, and that was the three leaders. So, but it is fair that in the process, bring a friend. They did walk through the security guarantees just a few days ago, so that was always the biggest sticking point for Ukraine. And you'll remember that there had been opportunities to do a peace deal in April of 2020, and the security guarantees, and among other things, were the sticking point. So I think that, at least from Zelensky's perspective and the European perspective, because they have their concerns about their own security, well, running through the security guarantees was critical. This multinational force, who knows? Certainly, the continued supplying of weapons and assisting the Ukrainian military in its development or stability, that's part of the security guarantee. But I note that while all of the parties have talked about, what critically Zelensky always wanted was a guarantee that the United States and allies would support it if invaded after a ceasefire or after some sort of peace. That's not really in this document. That it is more of the allies may go back to the Budapest memorandum. They may use military force. They may supply. They may give logistical assistance. So more of a repeat of what they're currently looking at, aside from this idea of helping to train or equip the Ukrainian army, and no information about to what degree, right? So I think at least, to your question, this was a fundamental for getting Zelensky to be agreeable to any kind of negotiated peace. And I think the Europeans are coming on board that there will be sacrifices, that from their kind of delusional dream that everything would be back to sovereign borders. And I think that it really does, as you've said, it does lay in the Russian hands, because they're the ones who've invaded. It's not as if you could place it at anyone else's doorstep. They're the ones who would have to stop. The war ends when Russia chooses it to end.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think I was just thinking then the information operation, which is, all sides have it. One of our guys who used to work for us for TNT Radio was actually invited to be in charge of that and decided not to, as an invitation to meet a bullet or something close to it. So, but if they got the truth out, if they did get the truth out, and the reason why this conflict started, and we know that Ukraine had 30 days of food left or something like that. It was just quite ridiculous, and you really shouldn't fire missiles into Russia without some sort of retaliation. More like a pesky insect that Russia wanted to swat, and they haven't yet swatted it, but they are going to. Danny, what do you think is required to bring peace or to stop the conflict? Do you think that Russia will just keep moving on and then there will be peace because there's nowhere else to go? Or do you think the EU, Trump and all the others will get together and start acting like adults? Because the EU is certainly like this little person out of this ring of decision makers trying to, don't forget me. And the EU is more of a nuisance than anything else towards a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia, or some would say NATO and Russia. What do you think is required to bring peace at the moment?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with Kate's point that the war stops when Russia stops it. I mean, what red line would you like Russia to give up to stop the war? I mean, which one that had been ignored before do they have to sacrifice to give the war up? Russia has reiterated time and time again, as soon as the money and the weapons stop flowing into Ukraine, the war can stop, or it will at least open up, give an opening rather, for talks and for peace to take place. Now, I don't think this needs to take place between Putin and Zelensky and Trump. Zelensky, as a fact, hasn't been the elected leader for a year and a half. His term ended in May 2024, and he's been quite unpopular since. He only has 2/3 of the country behind him at any real given point, between 60 and it doesn't get up to 70% approval. What does Russia have to give up? I mean, if you say that Russia was the only one that invaded, of course, I mean, I find it quite ironic that we've just seen this week the US launch its own special military operation of action in Venezuela.
Isn't that a bit of a whataboutism?
It's not a whataboutism, no, it's exactly the same thing. It's exactly
but you're comparing two things that are different to make an argument for the first.
I'm not comparing two things that are different. I'm comparing two things, two military operations. And it goes back to my original point. Well, if you want to strip it down to the facts, it's two military operations. There you go. But if Russia did the exact same thing and kidnapped a leader of a country that's got the largest oil reserves in the world, I mean, what conversation would we be having now? It doesn't matter.
I think the original point that you had countered was that it was. I was saying that it was up to Russia when this stops.
Made was what red line would Russia have to sacrifice? What would it have to give up, in your eyes, for them to stop? There hasn't been any. There hasn't been any attention given to those red lines that they have reiterated again and again and again. Before this was a military operation, a war, an invasion, when it was a crisis, and since there hasn't been any attention paid to those. There hasn't been any guarantees made. So I'm asking you, which one would they have to give up? Is it the no military funding, military aid to Ukraine? Is it the no training of Ukraine troops? Is it the no NATO hubs? Because now we've gone from NATO, which is, as we all know, is US led, to this coalition of the willing that can't do anything without the US's say so. The US has told them to go and try and sort it out, have your moment, and then we'll pick up the pieces afterwards. So where, I mean, which red line would you want them to sacrifice? That's my question. I just can't fathom.
I wouldn't suggest they sacrifice anything. I think it's up to them what they choose to do because they're the aggressor here and they have the dominant position. It's up to Russia. They would be the dominating force in making a decision to go to a peace table. They would have to be inclined. As to your analogy about the Russians asking for the weapons to stop coming, I suppose if you're about to go into a gunfight and you'd said I'll stop shooting you if you put your weapon down, I don't think anybody would really listen to that, would they? But I do think the Russians have the upper hand here. So if it is in their interest to stop, then they would stop. Otherwise, I think that they would have to say precisely what it would be that would change course.
So you can't tell me which one we've established?
No, of course not. I mean, ask the Russians. Do you want to stop the war? Maybe, maybe not.
Well, here's the question
for... I can answer that. Yes, I will respond to that. The special military operation that Russia has launched has had a very positive effect on Russian society. It has resulted in a wellspring of positive emotion about Russia, patriotism. It has also flushed all of the liberals out of the Russian system. A lot of them have actually left the country as a result of that. And it has convinced a great deal of Russians that Europe is not their friend. Europe and the United States are their enemies and that they should find friends elsewhere in the world, China, India, Brazil. And they have been actively doing that with really excellent positive results for for Russian society and Russian economy. So the special military operation is just the right tonic as far as the Russians are concerned. Also, the fact that this operation has allowed the Russian military to fine-tune its arsenals and develop new weapons. There's an entire new suite of weapons that the Russians use, including artificial intelligence, that will be a huge export component for Russia moving forward, because they're the ones with a successful winning military in the world, the only ones. And so the special military operation will continue until NATO falls apart and the EU falls apart and America retreats to its footprint and retrieves all of its troops from around the world and ceases to be a world power. As far as Russia is concerned, that would be soon enough.
Can I ask you, Kate, just sort of a sidebar here, because Donald Trump at the moment, king of the universe and the entire galaxy for that matter, and by the way, I think Donald Trump is doing a fairly good job in parts of America. I think his international is not doing so well at all. But having said that, if he does decide to say, well, Greenland it is, not green acres, but Greenland, and takes it off the Danish, says we want that now, it's ours, and the EU has made it quite clear that it's not going to happen, and Donald Trump has said it probably will happen. That would put a fair bit of stress on NATO, which would affect then the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine stroke NATO, wouldn't it?
Well, would it? I mean, is Russia really worried about NATO? I kind of...
Well, they are, because they've made it.
I know it's been voiced. I know it's said, but I really wonder.
He doesn't want them in. He does not want NATO in Ukraine.
Yeah, I know it's stated. I just don't understand the fear.
Sorry.
Well, there is a fear. There is a fear. If I could interject, the Russians are very concerned that NATO isn't afraid of Russia's nuclear weapons, and a lot of Russians are wondering whether they should have some kind of a nuclear demonstration. For instance, they could destroy Great Britain. And they're quite sure that if they did destroy Great Britain with nuclear weapons, the United States would not then enter a war with Russia, knowing that it's a suicidal move. So there are things like that being considered because NATO has been a little bit too much of a gadfly as far as Russia is concerned. But overall, there is an understanding that NATO is quite feeble at this point.
But
If it was ever such an issue, was it not in part some of the financial? Wasn't there a free trade agreement, EU Ukraine, that was also a problem? And while Ukraine also wanted one with Russia before the full scale, at least I don't know at what point that was. Perhaps you know better than I do.
Oh, yes. Well, the Ukraine benefited greatly by being part of the free trade zone with other former Soviet socialist republics. It received almost free natural gas from Russia, a lot of other preferences. It was basically, and it was receiving money, just $5 billion handed to it by Russia that was never repaid. Over the years of its independence, since the Soviet Union fell apart, it received maybe I'm not sure what the number is, but I think it's between 20 and 30 billion dollars of direct support from Russia, and so it decided to give up all of that in order to become a sort of American-inspired anti-Russia and to attack Russia and to enter into a proxy war with Russia, which was an idiot move, I'm sorry to say. And now the Ukraine will no longer be a country as a result of that.
It's very, very quiet being shut out here. Danny, what do you think? Give us your humble opinion.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to something that Dmitry said. He said that there's been quite a few positives for as a result of the special military operation, and one of those being that the liberals have been flushed out. Now, that liberal way of living, or that liberal worldview, mentality, mindset, whatever you want to call it, that's prevalent in a lot of Western countries, not least the States. Russian people, and this is a huge crux of what Vladimir Putin was trying to do, it's stand up for Russian values, conservative, Christian, Orthodox values, and not have NATO, which was feared, if it wasn't feared as a military power, was feared as something that is headed by the US and that was encroaching further and further towards Russia, almost to the border. If we hadn't had this military operation, they would be in Ukraine now. That's one of the big fears of it. That's something that people don't necessarily talk about. It's that cultural difference of not having, and I can see it myself. I've lived in Russia for 10 years. I'm from the UK. Our capital, London, is crime infested. It is full of homeless. It's full of illegal immigrants. I was in the States also over the summer, in New York, in the central business cultural hub of the US. And I can tell you, I would never in a million years want to live there. Certainly, I wouldn't want to swap the safety and the sanity of Moscow for the US, if it's not for my home country as well. One of those, the main thing that I see on the ground with people, and it's certainly seen it, we just had New Year here, which is, as I'm sure Dmitry will know, is like Christmas and New Year and your wife's birthday and your girlfriend's birthday as well, all rolled into one. And the message, the address from President Putin was one. He also made time for those at the front to say that the country is with you. We are all with you now. It is still at the forefront of Russian minds, and all the toasts around the table, certainly around our table, was for a swift finish. But I mean, that can't be without not compromising on those values.
Kate?
Yeah, I don't know that I'd sort of relate NATO to a value system per se, but I do understand the culture wars, of course. I happen to love New York City. I think it's fantastic.
There's a
It's
lot
one of
of
my
pluses.
favorite
There's a
places
lot
in
of
the
great
world.
things.
So
I'll give you that. I'll give you that. No, it is good.
partly I'm as lazy as can be. I want to walk straight out my apartment door and go maybe 50 feet to get a cup of coffee. And it's just an amazing city. So vibrant and full of life. I know I have a friend that was in Moscow recently who's a New Yorker and had commented on how clean it is. So I do appreciate those differences, but we all have our charms. So, the NATO issue, I think it's a fascinating question. Um, but I don't think Ukraine had any chance of being a member of NATO. I I spent a lot of time with the former NATO SAC discussing Ukraine back in 2019, and the corruption issues were significant, and they didn't meet the standard. So I think it was kind of it's a strange idea. Pushing to be a NATO member is one thing, actually becoming one is another. And the war really did shift that, because for those who did want to see NATO membership, I mean, it got closer because of the war than it ever did without it.
Sorry, can I just interject there? I think that they were sold. I think the Ukrainian people were pretty much sold this dream, and it was never going to happen. I think the people who sold them that dream knew it was never going to happen. NATO membership was always off the table, as was EU membership, as we've seen. They were sold that dream.
Yeah, well, I don't know who sold them. I mean, certainly Zelensky sold them on it, but and there may have been other NATO members that were pushing it hard, but I don't think it was something that was clearly viewed from the inside of NATO.
Yeah, that wasn't
So
known. That wasn't really known to the Ukrainians, was it? When they were sold that idea, I mean, it was never in
I
a
don't know
million.
that they were sold it. It was pushed very hard by Zelensky. I think the idea was pretty clear at the time. Certainly, if I was sitting there getting that information, I and it was an open
So what?
knowledge.
Sorry, can I just say that logically, why did you not? Why did America not respect that red line if they knew that Ukraine was never going to enter NATO? Why didn't they just come
Oh,
out
well,
and say?
not never, but certainly not anywhere near in that time.
Why didn't they just say,
Well,
okay,
I can respond to that if you don't mind. The basic idea was to make the Ukraine into a sort of anti-Russia and to have it attack Russia, and then there would be a revolt within Russia, and then Putin would be overthrown, and then the Americans, USAID or State Department people would rush in and install a Russian president who would be like Putin, who would then split up Russia into little chunks that that Western investment companies could buy up, and Russia would be gone. It would no longer be a concern. The reason that they thought that this was a sane plan was because after the Soviet Union fell apart, they fired all of their Russia experts, and they didn't know what was going on. And So this was really, really, really badly planned, and it didn't work out as expected.
I can't agree with that, simply because nobody would want Russia to fall apart. It's really not in the lexicon in the United States. In fact, it's something that would be a national security issue for the United States. I can't imagine any situation where carving Russia up into little pieces in the modern day would ever have been favored by anyone. Stability in Russia would be favored.
Yugoslavia was split up.
Yugoslavia was the model. The idea was we split up the Soviet Union, now let's split up Russia. It's still too big and too powerful. And there are lots of research, lots of think tank material on that subject that are widely circulated in Russia and laughed at.
Can I ask you, Dmitry, does Trump really, or does the US, does NATO, sorry, Kate, do they really want peace between Russia and the Ukraine or whatever, because it's not just Ukraine. And it's not about democracy. It's not about freedom. It's truly is about corruption. When you mention BlackRock, people mention BlackRock coming into this great big party. They're going to look after Ukraine. Then you have more corruption, Dmitry.
Well, there was this auto pen presidency in the United States. There was a zombie in the White House, and nobody knows who the minions were who sent cargo planes full of cash, still in the wrappers that they use in the Federal Reserve for issuing cash to American banks. They were sending all of that cash to the Ukraine and just handing it out. And then all of these Europeans and quite a few US congressmen and senators also made a beeline to Kiev and came back with suitcases of this newly minted American cash. And so that was the corruption. And that gave the Ukrainians material with which to blackmail just about any European or American leader into giving them even more money and even more weapons. So that is the pattern that's happening now. The US and the European Union are just completely corrupt. They have been completely Ukrainianized, and they can't stop, because the moment they do, the Ukrainians who have the dirt on them will basically ruin their political careers.
Can I ask you, Kate, why does the EU, von der Leyen, want the war to continue? And surely they want Russia to fall apart.
Well, I'd like to make a distinction between the EU and NATO, because they're different
No, there is a
organizations,
distinction.
even though they have the same membership. And they don't always have the same messaging either. And so I think maybe there is a bit of a we stand with Ukraine message that has been so strongly carried, maybe without consideration to reality. So maybe they're just catching up now.
Danny?
Sorry, what was the question again? Sorry, what you say? The EU and
Yeah, why is I mean, von der Leyen and the EU, I mean, they've made it quite obvious they'd like to see Putin drop into a volcano or get hit by a missile. tried all those things, but that's what they would like. And they certainly don't want Russia to hang around. They want Russia to just go away. And that's all they can do, because they can't do anything else. I mean, without Trump or the US providing missiles and stuff, and that's why I went back before. I said, do you think Trump really wants peace? If he wanted peace, he wouldn't give them missiles. But anyway, that's just another story on hypocrisy. But do you think the EU and von der Leyen, they would like this war to continue until someone can? I mean, Trump can. He's grabbed Maduro already. Maybe he could pop in and grab Putin and drop into that volcano.
no.
Luck on that one.
No, I can see from my apartment here. I can see Triumfalная Arka, which is Arc de Triomphe in Russian, which was built. I'm sure Dmitry will correct me here, as a reminder that when Napoleon's armies entered Russia and they fell, I think it was around 1812, that Russia could not be conquered, and we've seen it again and again and again and again. And von der Leyen in the EU and Merz and certainly Zelensky and Starmer and Macron can do what they've been doing all along. They can hope and they can pray and they can make their superficial statements, and they can posture and they can ponce around, but it's not going to lead to anything. These peace talks, this coalition of the willing, it's absolute nonsense. This war or this conflict will go on for as long as it is profitable. They're talking about the EU drawing up 90 billion euros to lend to Ukraine. It's only eligible to be paid back when there is a ceasefire, or when Russia accepts a ceasefire. So we're talking about pie in the sky again and again, and just endless loaning, endless debt, endless lending, and just this money being funneled through Ukraine. So again, I will go back to my original point, and I think it's the most logical that I make, is that if those red lines are not respected, which they weren't from the very beginning, and they were outlined again and again and again, NATO aggressively expanding, the US aggressively reiterating again and again that we will not listen to Russia, and we will keep expanding. We will dangle NATO membership in front of Ukraine. That has acted as the catalyst for all of this. So long when that stops, when the profitability stops, then we can see some sort of end in sight. Certainly, as far as I'm concerned, that red line that I keep going on and on and on about, if that's not respected, then there will not be any kind of peace talks.
Dmitry, von der Leyen, otherwise known as Attila the Honey, she does want a war, and same with the EU. They want it to continue. How do we temper their enthusiasm? I've got no idea how it would happen, but we see, and NATO, and Kate, I think you were so wrong about NATO. They are very important in this whole bun fight at the moment. But you have one hand, you have the EU and von der Leyen doing what they're doing, bring on the war, and then you have Donald Trump, and he is acting very odd, I have to say. He's continuing the backyard bully to the rest of the world stage, and no matter how bad Maduro is, I mean, surely they could just do their old 101 on how to change regimes and have just assassinate him or do something. But no, they've got to plonk him out of Venezuela. And then you look at if you look at Mexico, bad luck, we're going to bomb you now because you've got these bad people there. Oh, and by the way, we're going to take Greenland. So I'm just wondering, where do we go from here? How do we temper the enthusiasm of the EU to prolong this war? And then how do we temper the enthusiasm of Donald Trump to become the king of the universe?
Well, I think that there are two things. Was the question to me? I'm sorry.
I mean,
was the question to me?
Yeah. Yes, to you. Yes, Dmitry.
Okay, good. I think that there are two things going on, two very large things going on. One is that the EU has pretty much wrecked itself, and Great Britain as well, with the Green New Deal and the anti-Russian sanctions. It has pretty much ruined itself economically. Cutting it off from cheap Russian gas has destroyed German industry, which was the driver of the entire European economy. So what Europe is looking at is a 50% drop in the standard of living over a few years. Now, what can the politicians in Europe do to convince their people that they're not at fault for doing that? Blame Putin, of course. So in order to make that seem respectable, they have to have some kind of a military conflict going on, this proxy war with Russia in the Ukraine. So they'll keep that going. As far as what Trump is doing, you see, the United States is broke. It's a bankrupt country. It has to raise something like $3 trillion over the next year. And considering that neither the Chinese nor the Japanese are buying U.S. debt anymore, and the rest of the world is just basically sitting on the sidelines, gold is going crazy, silver is going crazy. It just doesn't seem likely. Where everybody's waiting for the AI bubble to pop. The United States has to start cutting its losses. So Trump is saying, okay, we're just giving up on Eurasia, but the Western Hemisphere is ours, including South America. And I guess the next step is, okay, forget South America. It's just us, Canada, and Mexico. And by the way, give us Greenland. And then the next step after that is, okay, forget Greenland. We'll just have Canada and Mexico. And then the U.S. will cave in on its own footprint after that. So that's really what's going on, as the West is caving in on itself, and Russia is just there as a prop.
Yeah, I sort of agree. I don't think Canada's got much trouble. I don't think anybody wants Canada. So they're fairly safe at this stage. But I'm just thinking, though, and I'm being a bit frivolous too, but Kate, the American involvement in the attack on Putin's residence, what do you think Russia will do about that? Or what do you think, how do you think the Russians feel? And I'll also get Dmitry and Danny's thoughts on that too, because it's a pretty serious. Trust me. Oh, by the way, you stay there, and it's a very, very bad way to talk about peace and bring peace to the region when you're trying to knock off someone who's involved in that whole conversation.
Yeah, the satellite footage on that didn't indicate that that had occurred, but I'm not up to date on. I would think it was on the day and the day after that was what was reported. So I don't have any new information on that, so I can't comment. But I believe that the satellite footage, at least on the day and the day after, did not indicate that strike
Danny, it's not a good look, is it?
on the residents. No strike. So
It's not. I mean, it's not a good look, I guess. Yeah, but I mean, like
if it didn't happen,
Well, yeah. I mean, I was just about to say. I mean, if I can finish, I had we've seen like missiles being flown all over, and each side claimed that it's come from the other. Remember when the two farmers were killed in Poland by what was reported at the time as a Russian missile. In fact, it was a Ukrainian missile that had backfired or misfired and then landed across the border in Poland. So again, I mean, these things make fantastic headlines, but I mean, how true are they? I think I'd base the US intentions or their end game, as they call it in the US, on things that are more obvious and that have been proven. And from what we've got, of course, we can see. As I said, this is going to go on for as long as it's profitable. There's going to be no other way. There's going to be no Putin thrown in a volcano or out of a helicopter, like in Scarface or something. There's going to be no pictures of him with a bedsheet over his head and in cuffs like Maduro or anything like that. It's just not going to happen.
Dmitry, we are going to wrap this up very shortly. It's gone way over. And Kate, you've done a great job. You must be exhausted. It's very early where you are, but who needs sleep? That's what I say. Dmitry, and I'll ask this to everybody, what will the landscape be like, for example, if there is a peace deal of sorts? How will Ukraine look, and the EU look, for that matter?
Well, to wrap up the previous discussion, there was an attack on Putin's residence, and it triggers Russia's nuclear doctrine because it was an attack on Russia's leadership, direct attack. The evidence on that has been recovered from the drones. Some of the drones were shot down. There were 91 of them. Some of them were shot down, but others were taken over using radio warfare equipment, were landed on the ground and disassembled, and the tracking and waypoint information was extracted from their American-made components, and it was made clear that all of that, the entire attack, was arranged by American intelligence. That information was given over by the American military attaché in Moscow. So Americans saying that it didn't happen is just beyond ridiculous. It doesn't change the facts what Americans think or don't think. It did happen. Now, and what it means is that there will be no more peace discussions. Nuclear doctrine has been triggered. What the response will be is now up to Russia. They're not going to ask anyone's permission. There will be no negotiations. It's over. So that's the thing to understand. As far as, just to wrap it up, as far as how it's going to end with Russian victory.
And how will the landscape look? What will how will Ukraine look? Will it be a welcoming place for other than Ukrainians? Will you have a mixture of people coming there? Will it be a free society, or do we have just a very messy graveyard?
A very messy graveyard is one way to put it. The Ukrainians are a feckless bunch. They have absolutely no ethnic solidarity that I could ever detect from all of the times that I've been there. And, I could claim to be Ukrainian. My father was born in Kiev. it's a troubled place from that point of view. And what they really have to do is fight a civil war amongst themselves before they can sort out who they're going to be. And if they can do that without Western involvement, then there could be a good result. If they are interfered with by the West, if that continues, then it's just going to be the wild field again, this border region between Russia and the West, which for hundreds of years has been a wasteland and may become a wasteland again.
Kate, how do you think it will look? We have a fairly grim description of what Dmitry thinks, and quite possibly so. How do you think the landscape will be? Do you think it'll be a warm, welcoming place, or exactly what Dmitry has suggested?
I think that the idea that some trigger has occurred because of a drone that didn't appear at the residence is silly, and I think that the future of Ukraine is not as simple as that. The Ukrainians mounted
Do
an
you think Sergei Lavrov is
extraordinary.
silly? Do you
Yes,
think Sergei Lavrov is silly?
I did not say
Yeah.
that. I did not say that. You
Well,
said that.
did
But
you hear his announcement?
I'm telling you that didn't happen. So, and it would be something that would be under dispute. And I will add to that to answer the question, if I may. The Ukrainians were able to fight against Russia for the last 3 years with the help of the EU and the United States, but they did launch an extraordinarily unified battle against Russia and have fought very nobly against the invasion. So I don't see any reason why they wouldn't have the capacity to work together for some sort of future. The question is what really Russia and Ukraine choose their future to be. It may be that these two can get along and be neighbors in a day, some other time, and there's some rebuilding, and you have a return to some normal relationships and a better future for everyone. But I don't think that they are somehow a failed state or a failure. They've been decimated
It's just
by
you and
an
me, I guess.
attack from a very large state, and they fought quite nobly against it.
Danny?
Yeah, where can I start? I mean, I know I've got to be quick to wrap it up. Yeah, it's going to be grim. I think that the Ukrainians have been sold this idea of national identity. It's been pumped up by those around them, not by themselves, to fight down to the last Ukrainian. It's not even one of their sayings to fight down to the last Ukrainian. And if the money is still going to be pumped in to Ukraine, if they're still going to be sold this idea of freedom, of white knights from Europe come galloping in and liberating them, then it's going to be even bleaker than what I think it's going to be. I can't see in any reasonable way. Certainly, the territories that have already been occupied by Russia being given up at all. A lot of people from these cities are tired of being told that they can't speak Russian, can't consider themselves Russian, and can't be happy that Russia have come and taken back Russian cities that were built during the Russian Empire, which again goes down to the question of national identity. If you want to talk about national identity, talk about those Russians who are every day being told that they can't speak their native tongue. It's even Zelensky or their champion boxer Usyk, who are native Russian speakers who've had to learn Ukrainian pretty much from scratch or from school knowledge to be able to give speeches and to be able to rally round or rally the native fellow countrymen round to G them up to fight down to the last Ukrainian. I mean, it's completely silly to say that the Ukrainians are really up for this continued war when they've been sold this dream and they've been sold this line that they must fight down to the very last one of them. They're fighting down to extinction. So yeah, it's going to be bleak.
Well, they have no choice. I mean, you either volunteer or we'll just grab you off the street. And you go,
this is very true, and this is very true, and this is why a lot of them left as well. There's a lot of them in the UK. I don't know why they ended up in the UK. Real patriots are in Moldova, Hungary, Slovakia, and they're waiting until they can go back. They're waiting for that bleakness. They didn't run off. They didn't open OnlyFans accounts. They didn't leech off the UK government. These are the people that are claiming to be refugees, that are manipulating that word, and that manipulating the countries that accept them. Those in the neighbouring countries that border Ukraine are the ones that are waiting until this unrest sees some sort of reasonable rest, and they can go back and they can still live in the territory that they've been born in.
I've enjoyed this very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Kate, for staying up late or getting up early. I'm not too sure which. Probably getting home from going out night clubbing or something. I'm not too sure about. No, maybe not. Dmitry Orlov, linguist and author, thank you so much. Dmitry, if somebody wants to find out more about you, how do they do that?
I'm on boosty.to/Club Orlov.
Sounds like some place we should visit.
Well, Club Orlov does sound a good place, yeah.
Well, TO stands for the, okay.
Now, finish up, Dmitry. Sorry about that.
TO stands for the island of Tonga, but it's in Russia. That's very odd. It's boosty.to/Club Orlov.
Nothing odd about that. Kate Jones, Bureau Chief for World Media, UK, USA. How do they find out more about what you do and your organisation?
Actually, you could, we've just launched The Context in the UK. It's a British quarterly magazine, and we also have an online presence. And that's probably the quickest, fastest way to see my work. Otherwise, we're just launched the US version and a long time UK version. So, you'll see us more broadly soon.
Yep, and I'm actually familiar with your new publication because I was looking at or just reading about it the other day. So we must get you back on again at a more respectable time. Unless you're back in the UK, then great. And Danny Armstrong, Moscow-based Russia specialist. Somebody wants to find out more about you. How do they do that?
Yeah, I always get quite embarrassed by the Russia specialist thing, but I'm Danny Wayne Armstrong everywhere. If for some reason you want to listen to what I say, then that's the name to remember.
Spasiba.
Спасибо большое.
Actually, I was in Russia a little while ago, about a year ago now, and I was with one of the guys in the car with me, and he's from the UK, and we were from the airport to the hotel, and it was a magnificent day. It was in summer, and we looked around, and we jokingly said, if we were Western media or mainstream media, we'd be saying there's nothing but tanks all over the place. People are impoverished, but it's a magnificent city, Moscow, and Russia's a very, very strong and a very good country, contrary to what legacy media goes on about. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great weekend. I'm going swimming. I wouldn't suggest maybe in Moscow you jump into the river, break the ice, jump in there. Kate, you could do that in Washington. It's pretty nippy there too. So if you go for a swim, don't tell me about it. Thank you very much. This has been The Protagonists, and this is The World Today.